All right, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around this amazing globe that we live on. My name is Phil Ferrante, and I am a senior database freedom go-to-market specialist for the Database Freedom team. I come to you today from the Bay Area, California. So I'm excited to talk to you today. I frankly have the amazing job of getting to talk to customers of all sizes across the globe regarding their database migration journeys. And today I'm excited to share with you some of the ways that customers have moved to AWS in order to really save, grow, and innovate more than ever today. So enough about me. Let's dive in because we've actually got a pretty packed agenda here. The first thing I'd like to talk to you today about is some migration momentum. Momentum is really picking up more than ever. Today, it's really less about or what will move to the cloud. It's more about how fast people want to move to the cloud. So we'll be weaving in some customer stories throughout to give you kind of a small flavor or window into some of those types of workloads customers are moving. The next thing we're going to talk about is the AWS really has a broadest set of managed database services. The days of really sort of one database to rule them all really have come at their limits. So what we're starting to see are patterns and practices around customers really trying to leverage the right database for the right job. So we're going to dive into some of those today. The next thing we're going to talk about is moving to fully managed database services and some of the benefits that those bring. And we're going to spend a lot of time, this one's near and dear to my heart, talking about breaking free from the old guard databases. I work with customers, again, all around the globe that are really looking at ways to modernize and migrate away from the constraints of their commercial database systems. Then I'm going to talk about the how, right? All of this sounds great, Phil, but how do you help customers migrate to the cloud is one of the most common questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have in place, the people that we have to support you, and really the technology that we built to help accelerate your migration to the cloud. Lastly, we'll close out with a bit of resources that you can, and some next steps that you can take immediately to get visibility into some of the tools and some of the programs that we have. And lastly, we'll open it up for Q&A so we can answer your questions. We'll have a combination of folks like myself that take slightly more business lens on this, but we'll also have some technical subject matter experts on some of our managed database offerings as well, should you have some questions about those migrations. All right, so I love this slide because it really captures a good cross-sampling of the diverse set of customers from all industries and sizes. AWS really originally was leveraged by digital natives. It's companies like Flipboard, Fiverr, Zendesk, Zoom, Airbnb, and many more, right? And they got started on us because it was, I'm putting my air quotes up, it was easy to develop new apps. But more recently, in sort of the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen a swing in momentum over to more of the enterprise space where they were looking to not necessarily build new, although they wanted to find out how they could migrate their databases over to AWS and really make that easy. So in 2015, we launched the AWS Database Migration Service, really to make it easier for companies like you to bring your production databases over to AWS and break free from the cost and complexities of old guard databases. DMS makes it super easy for customers like you to migrate your on-prem commercial engines like Oracle and SQL over to our relational database services engines like MySQL and RDS. And since 2015, we've with this tool, migrated over 350,000 databases for customers like Verizon, Trimble, Expedia, U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. All of them have successfully moved databases over into AWS with DMS. Now, one quick note of mention here, 350,000 databases is actually just a small subset of the entire databases running on Amazon. The reality is a lot of customers will move databases using different tooling and et cetera, but thought this was an interesting kind of point here. So let's pivot over into talking about one of these customers you see on the slide, and that's Samsung. The thing that I actually really like about this story is Samsung account has over 1.1 billion users. That's 1 out of about every 8 people on Earth using the service. And Samsung account, uses Samsung Pay, Samsung devices, cloud, health, and a whole bunch of other services. It really provides the core mission critical capability for all of its users. Historically, they built this about 10 years ago on an Oracle database, and Samsung needed a more flexible and modern microservices driven solution to support the growth and innovation. Oracle wasn't really up to the task. In this case, it was a monolith and they wanted to break it into microservices. And it also, frankly, Oracle didn't offer reasonable pricing at this scale. It was continuing to grow year over year as Samsung is the number one mobile phone provider in the globe. So Samsung went on a journey for about 18 months and completely deconstructed its monolith from Oracle into open source microservices running on Amazon. And the results were pretty compelling. While it did take a while to initially bootstrap the development and refactor some of that monolith into microservices, the reality is that once they moved over, they were able to reduce their monthly database costs by over 44%. So I'm going to sprinkle in some nuggets like this throughout the presentation, but wanted to give you an idea of really the types of mission critical applications that are running on AWS today. So let's talk a little bit about fully managed database services. I like to put up this slide. This is one that's always interesting to really look at when we think about the types of activities that DBAs execute throughout their daily task. It's these types of things that you see here on the left, right? It's setting up patching, setting up monitoring. It's doing routine maintenance, having the ability to push button scale. Oftentimes takes a ton of development, scripting, and very specific domain knowledge to really pull those off successfully. Setting up things like backup and recovery. I've talked to a lot of DBAs in my years, and not one of them has ever said, Phil, you know what I'd love doing? Backup and recovery. It just doesn't happen. Where they really want to spend their time is kind of in these upper sections here, doing things like query optimization or making a database really run well. Maybe working on new schema design for new applications that the line of business would like to bring to market. The reality is a lot of the tactical stuff is taking up a disproportionate amount of time from DBAs. So when Amazon really built out our fully managed database offerings, that's the type of stuff that we wanted to really remove from DBAs workload, was that undifferentiated heavy lifting. It's all the things that I talked about, just kind of flip that, right? So with AWS managing all of those sort of undifferentiated heavy lifting tasks, the scripting, the maintenance of those scripts, the backup, the recovery, all of those things, it allows DBAs to really focus on things that are more value add to the business, like bringing new applications to market, optimizing your queries to be able to run faster. And that really provided the core. We listened to DBAs and we only took away the things that they didn't want to do while leaving them the flexibility to focus on the things that they do want to do. So let's pivot here for a minute and talk a little bit about some of the benefits realized by moving to a managed database. The first is really agility. AWS lets you quickly spin up resources as you need them, deploying hundreds or even thousands of servers in minutes. And this actually came to I would say its peak here this year. If we think back to about the COVID timeframe back in 2020, we worked with customers like Zoom and Airbnb. And as Zoom was quickly saw their demand for services spike, AWS was able to partner with them to literally spin up thousands of EC2 instances a day to be able to support that capacity. That's just something that you can't do on an on-premises infrastructure. And while they knew they had a projected growth trajectory to be able to grow, nobody could have anticipated the type of growth that they would have experienced. Conversely, Airbnb saw a slightly, different take on COVID, where they saw a lot of their business, cancel as a result. So they were able to, theoretically, right, dial down some of that capacity. So this agility is a self-reinforcing loop that is incredibly powerful for the cloud. The next one I'm going to talk about is innovating faster. And these really build on each other, right? With the increased agility and all of the kind of operations and things that are taken out of the DBA sort of day in a life, really, I've seen customers accelerate their project timelines and their project roadmap as a result of being able to focus on doing things like schema design for critical new applications. The next one is really performance and scalability. We touched a little bit on the scalability as well a little bit earlier, but on the performance side, we often find, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, that as you typically compare an on-premises architecture, hardware is usually 3 to 7 years old, depending on what the depreciation structure looks like in your organization. Amazon is always running the latest and greatest hardware that allows a lot of times for databases to be lifted and shifted even or moved over to one of our managed and actually perform better. And I'll get a much more objective on this via a study I'll share with you in just a moment. And then lastly, reducing costs, right? Oftentimes that is the significant driver, but it's always interesting to have a conversation with customers like you, understanding which one of these are the priority and in a fun sort of exercise to actually ask you to stack rank those. We'll find that the conversation changes. Certainly when COVID hit, the indexing of conversation was largely on the cost. Prior to that, it was more around increasing agility, innovating faster, and the other ones. So think of this as a sort of squishy ball that we can move around a bit. So let's talk a little bit about fully managed database services other than just the relational that we've touched on. AWS offers the broadest and richest set of database services for you to move your database workloads to the cloud. And customers like you are doing this really at record levels and in many different areas. I'll first touch on the relational, then I'll spend a bit of time talking about non relational. And then a relatively recent emergence is hybrid. So, first is the relational side, really for customers wanting to move away from self managing their Oracle, SQL, maybe even on the open side, MySQL or Postgres, MariaDB database engines to a managed. AWS offers Amazon Relational Database Services and Amazon Aurora. On the non-relational side, we've seen an incredible uptick in AWS, and frankly, our customers have asked us. We love open source non-relational technologies like MongoDB or Cassandra or some of the caching engines. Help us figure out how to manage these effectively. We love the technology, but it's a pain to manage. And for that, we developed DynamoDB, DocumentDB, Elasticache, and key spaces, all managed. So you can leverage the power of those open non-relational engines in your environment. And then lastly, we heard loud and clear from our customers, hey, AWS, I'm not ready to put everything up in the cloud. Maybe I've got some residency things that are keeping me on-prem here for some of those workloads, but I love the idea of you helping to manage those environments. So how can we do that? And for that, we have our hybrid databases, specifically RDS on Outposts and RDS on VMware, which really allows you to take the benefits of the cloud and leverage them for on-prem. So let's go ahead and dive into a couple of these in just a little bit more detail. Oftentimes, customers are running, such as you are running databases such as Oracle and SQL Server on-prem, and they're not quite ready to look at, say, Aurora or the open engines. It's really about making that initial move to the cloud. And sometimes there's a time forcing function that's associated with this. If you needed, for example, to exit a data center, a lot of times the appetite, at least in the near term, around refactoring doesn't balance out with the risk associated with that against the time. So we have a lot of customers that'll take their Microsoft SQL Server environment and their Oracle environment and move it to RDS to take advantage of all of the benefits we had talked about with regards to operations. Other times we have customers that'll say, you know what, Phil, we're really interested in taking our SQL Server environment or Oracle environment. Let's explore what that means to really move it over to Postgres. We're tired of paying the licensing fees and all the things that go along with that. So let's explore that. We're going to dive into the kind of the tactics and the how to, but think of moving to the cloud as a journey. It's not one size fits all. And oftentimes we see customers such as yourselves take multiple steps. And sometimes that first step in getting comfortable with the cloud and building that muscle memory is the easiest one by staying on the database engine, but offloading all of those operations. And again, it kind of becomes a virtuous flywheel, because now once you're not sucked down into the operations of managing an environment with all those tactical things, now you can actually free up your DBAs to spend time on some of those refactoring efforts. And it becomes this sort of virtuous self-fulfilling loop, if you will. And similar to the relational side is the non-relational side. So many of you are probably using non-relational databases like MongoDB and Redis in things like mobile apps, catalogs, real-time use cases such as caching, gaming leaderboards, session stores, and etc. Oftentimes, the most straightforward and simple solution for many folks who are struggling to maintain those non-relational databases is really to move them to a managed database, like moving to managed database running on Document DB, moving Cassandra workloads to Amazon Keyspaces, moving self-managed in-memory databases like Redis and Elasticache to Amazon Elasticache. And in most cases, you can migrate these workloads and applications to managed services without needing to re-architect or refactor the application. And that's a huge, huge benefit, right? Is being able to port those over. So let's translate this into something meaningful that we can talk about. So I'm going to talk about an IDC study that was done for AWS, and it was a study conducted for customers that have already moved to AWS managed databases, comprised of Oracle, SQL, to a lesser extent, MySQL, MariaDB, and Postgres. It was largely indexed on the commercial databases, but it was comprised of a bunch of them. And they were moving their databases from on-prem over to the AWS. So IDC did an in-depth interview from multiple customers and really multiple industries. So they from small all the way to large. And then they took into account both quantitative and qualitative data in order to really determine concrete measurable benefits. So they built a composite organization, which effectively is a fancy way of saying they averaged all the results together. And that's what I'm about to share with you now. So the first thing was a significant gain in productivity. They were able to determine that on average, DBAs were able to manage 60% more databases per DBA, a huge benefit. And it's all the reasons that we talked about earlier with reduction in kind of the management of the tactical things. But equally as important, it allowed them to take that reclaimed time and apply it towards more strategic initiatives. Another huge benefit, and some of the pushback I honestly get from customers when I'm talking to, for instance, DB leaders, is, hey, what's in it for like the app team? We're having trouble convincing them. Well, this study found that we were able to deploy, once on AWS, code 86% faster through the environment. And really, I mean, anytime you speed that up, all it does is increase that development life cycle. So developer productivity went up by 42%. The next one was risk. I alluded to a bit earlier about just the modern hardware and everything that AWS runs on here. Huge benefit here. Customers, we were able to realize 90%, 97% less unplanned downtime by running on AWS. And it's all of the underlying reliable AWS architecture that we've built over the last time to be able to support that. And then equally as important here, and I thought this one was really cool, running on modern hardware just makes stuff run faster. Moving over databases, same engine, oftentimes resulted in 34% less database latency and 21% faster queries. And then again, when we talk about seconds potentially making the difference between a good experience, customer experience, or a bad customer experience, that type of performance really matters. And then certainly, last but not least, reducing costs. IDC found that overall was a 39% lower total cost of ownership and a 3-year ROI of 264%. When all of that is sort of taken into account, IDC realized a total economic impact of about $37,400 per database per year when all of those matters were factored in. I think that's pretty cool. So I mentioned we'd be sprinkling in a couple of stories here throughout. I'm going to talk through a couple of these quick. They're unique stories in their own right, and I suspect that some of these stories might resonate with different folks on the call here. But first one I'll talk about is Kaplan. Kaplan serves more than 1.2 million students globally each year through its array of higher education, test prep, professional education, and then English language training, university prep, and a bunch of other offerings. Kaplan, like many of the other customers I talk to, I feel like I have this conversation every week, was really butting up against of a data center exit. Some of their colos were expiring, and they really needed to consolidate down a bunch of hardware that was realizing its end of life. So space issues, all of those other things as well. They partnered with AWS. And in this particular case, we looked at doing a moved to manage type of motion where they didn't have the appetite, as I mentioned earlier, to go through and refactor those applications in those databases, but instead they wanted to move them to the cloud, to Amazon RDS for Oracle and Amazon RDS for SQL Server. So they went through and did that. And at the end of the day, they were able to consolidate from 12 data centers down to 4. And that first initial step makes a lot of sense. And as they once were on-prem and now are on AWS running in a managed environment, that then frees up the cycle to do the things that I mentioned, right? Accelerating your timeline for your product roadmap, or just doing more value add types of differentiated work for the line of business. So that's kind of the classic enterprise. And then I decided to pick Instacart as sort of the opposite end of that, right? Digital native customer was running open source actually, and they were self-managing their environment. But they quickly realized that there wasn't a lot of value in doing the tactical aspects of managing their Postgres environment. So they decided to move it to RDS Postgres for all the reasons that we mentioned. So it's not just the classic, enterprises such as Kaplan that are moving. It's also even the digital natives that are recognizing, hey, there's a better way to do this and focus on what matters for the business. All right, so now this is the part that I'm super excited to chat about, really breaking free from the old guard databases. Every week I'm having conversations with multiple customers that are talking about, hey, Phil, how do we move away from our commercial databases over to something more open? And it's really these reasons, right? Customers are fed up with kind of the old way of doing things. They want to move away from the old guard databases because they're expensive, that are proprietary. They lock you in with specific features that you might take advantage of, and it makes it hard to get out of. They have punitive licensing. Within just the last couple of years, we've seen commercial vendors like Oracle and SQL Server, Microsoft, I should say, change their licensing on the fly to actually make it disadvantageous for you, taking away your choice from where you run your workloads by moving those to AWS. And we just don't think that's fair. Oracle, as an example, has doubled their licensing costs if you run their software on AWS. And Microsoft has removed BYL for RDS SQL Server. And we just think that's not a customer-focused way of doing things. So what are customers doing? Well, they're looking at breaking free, and they're looking at open source. MySQL, Postgres are two hugely popular open databases. MariaDB is as well. And customers have been slowly over the last 5-6 years starting to move to MySQL and Postgres. But the reality is it's hard to achieve the same level of performance as those commercial database vendors offer. So that's when AWS actually stepped in, and getting the same performance was, again, tricky out of the open source databases, but it's possible. And that's actually what Amazon has done. But it required a lot of tuning and ongoing maintenance. And folks like you that were moving to open source databases asked AWS for the performance and reliability of commercial grade databases, combined with the pricing and the flexibility and the freedom of open source databases. So we built Amazon Aurora, and really with all those restrictions and licensing and removed from SQL Server and Oracle, they're starting to break free to open source friendly engines like Aurora. Amazon Aurora is a MySQL and Postgres compatible database built for the cloud. And it combines the performance and availability of sort of the traditional enterprise databases with the simplicity and cost effectiveness of open source databases. The key thing here is some innovations at the storage layer that allows Aurora to be 5 times faster than MySQL and 3 times faster than standard Postgres databases. And equally as more important is it provides along with it all of the availability, reliability, and security that you get with a commercial grade databases at 1/10 the cost. And oh, by the way, it's fully managed. So all of the things that I was mentioning with RDS is applicable to Aurora. It's a fully managed database as well. So let's talk a moment actually about DynamoDB, because this is a pretty unique offering from AWS. Amazon DynamoDB is a key value and document database that delivers single-digit millisecond performance at any scale, like at Amazon Prime scale. It's fully managed, multi-region, multi-master, and is a durable database with built-in security, backup and restore, in-memory caching, like all the things that you would expect for a database to support internet scale applications. It can handle more than 10 trillion requests per day. It can support peaks of more than 20 million requests per second. It's the reason why many of the world's fastest growing and largest businesses, such as Lyft, Airbnb, and Redfin, as well as enterprises such as Samsung that we talked about earlier, all depend on that performance of DynamoDB for their mission critical workloads. Realistically, hundreds of thousands of AWS customers have chosen DynamoDB because it provides the velocity and the volume to be able to handle all of those inbound workloads for things like, gaming, IoT, ad tech, all the things that are really starting to emerge. So if you haven't had a chance to really explore DynamoDB and you're either exploring massively, scalable applications that need sub-millisecond response time, definitely a good one to explore. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Experian. Experian is another great example. The business challenge Experian faced was changing its image from really just a credit bureau, right? Credit bureau was nothing too exciting. It was something that we only encountered maybe once when we either bought a car or bought a house, but they were completely changing their image with this idea and this concept of taking control of their credit and bringing the consumers to them. And when they were looking at refactoring and building a new customer-facing application, they decided that they were going to go with an Amazon DynamoDB and an Amazon Aurora combination for really all of the things that we had talked about. They needed to assure that as they opened up the floodgates for customers to be able to take control of their credit, they didn't quite know how many people were going to be, proactive in doing that, but they know they needed the growth to be able to account for that type of load. So they've moved over from their current on-prem SQL server. They deconstructed what was portions of a monolith and then ported over to Amazon DynamoDB and Amazon Aurora. All right, so all that kind of building up, let's talk to different ways to migrate databases over into the cloud. And I wanted to spend just a short bit amount of time talking through really kind of the journey. It's true there's no kind of one size fits all. And really at its most basic, starting on the left here, is doing a lift and shift of your database workloads over here. There's very good reasons that you might do that. Oftentimes, I alluded to those earlier, you might be staring down the barrel of a data center exit as an example, and you don't have the appetite to refactor and there's risk management in place. Oftentimes, lift and shifting can be a great first step to moving databases over. And in that case, you can look at doing BYOL for your licensings, but you're still sort of in that business of managing your environment, right? But in some cases, managing that environment at a very granular level down to the database is something that you actually require. So we offer that in a rehost scenario. The next one I'll draw your attention to is really moving to managed. And we spent a lot of time earlier on that, but the idea here is let's remove the undifferentiated management of databases. Let's let AWS handle that, and let's focus on, just the things that matter, right? Performance tuning, creating new applications, et cetera. And then lastly is really breaking free. Think of this as a multi-step journey. You can go directly from a lift and shift to maybe a move to managed if you wanted to stay on the same database engine. I have other customers that start in a lift and shift on AWS and go right to break free. But breaking free is oftentimes where I see sort of the vision going. It's where customers want to ultimately get to. And that's all about actually refactoring then the database and the applications to take advantage of the managed databases, managed open databases like, say, Aurora or MySQL, Postgres, et cetera. So we work to meet you where you are on your migration journey. And AWS over its tenure has worked with customers, and we really distilled sort of the key things that customers need down to sort of these three pillars. Customers needed actually really improved tooling. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we have developed really innovative tooling such as Database Migration Service and Schema Conversion Tool, which drastically reduce the amount of manual effort associated with migrating databases. I'll double click down into each of these for just a moment. The Schema Conversion Tool is really a tool that you can run both against your database engine as well as your source code to help determine, I should say, how complex those databases may or may not be. Oftentimes I talk to customers and it's like, hey, we have thousands of databases. Which are the easy ones to move? And running the schema conversion tool against those databases will effectively look at not the data, but the database schema, store procedures, and the sort of attributes of a database to really help determine how complex that database will be. And we see a continuum, right? That continuum could be a very simple database like a JDBC or ODBC connection, where all they're doing is just storing data. In that case, that would be sort of like a level 1 of simplicity. And then on the opposite end of that scale would be something like a level 5 of complexity, something like a COTS application or something making significant use of proprietary database features from those commercial offerings. But what I love about this tool is it takes out the anecdotes and really injects objectivity into the analysis of the database. So that is absolutely an instrumental tool that you can use and add to your sort of toolkit, if you will, to be able to really help rationalize your overall database environment and really come up with a good roadmap of tackling the easy ones and then moving on to the more complex. And then Database Migration Service. So DMS was the tool that we alluded to a bit earlier that's moved over 350,000 databases to Amazon. Once we have an idea of what the target looks like, DMS can actually be set up on premises to move your on-premises environments over into an AWS landing zone. So it takes care of like CDC, all those things that you would need to do during a cutover. And then it's a tool that you can operationally work with to move your data, but also know that all of the native tools you use with your databases today could also be used. So that's kind of the tooling side. The next thing that we realize is customers need, frankly, access to experts. And AWS brings, solutions architects, business development professionals such as myself, professional services. We have system integrators, training, all of those things to be able to, help not only with the technical aspects of moving into the cloud, but frankly, also the operational pieces. We need to make sure that you have the ability to operate that environment once it's in the cloud. There are some things to learn, but the good news is you're not the first ones, through this journey, and we've encapsulated, I should say, best practice patterns and anti-patterns, all of those things. So definitely got a lot of experts that we can bring to bear to help. And then lastly, the programs, maybe even the most important. The programs really that we have help with all of the first two, the tools and the experts. And based on what your goals and your objectives are, we can oftentimes help also offset the double bubble costs with moving over into AWS. So those are sort of the three main pillars that we've seen where customers need assistance. And to that point, we've actually developed something called the Database Freedom Program, which is near and dear to me. It's my home. It's where I reside. But effectively, what the Database Freedom Program is a way to help assist you during the early phases of your journey to help bring those experts to bear when you have those operational questions, or you have those migration questions, or you have those tooling questions. Our goal is to be able to bring that technical subject matter expertise, give you the migration support that you need, and then where possible, give you the financial assistance to be able to help offset those double bubble costs that go along with it as well. And then lastly, but not least, certainly, thinking about how best to execute, I'll talk a little bit about what our migration journey looks like. So we really break it up into kind of 3 phases, maybe 4, depending on how you slice it. But really it's the assess, mobilize, and then migrate and modernize, depending on how you approach that last part. But really assess is all about the what and the why. This is where AWS works with you to create a case for change. So it's not just about how we change, but helping create a directional business case even as well. Whether you have one database or potentially hundreds or thousands, we work to uncover the aspects of the workloads that either make it easy or complicated, like, as I mentioned, the engine-specific functionality or the business logic within a database, as well as the dependencies, just to name a few. What we then do is kind of perform an analysis. We have a series of sort of tools that we could bring to bear to really help take what looks like that large elephant and start to kind of pick it apart one piece at a time. So our goal here is to kind of do discovery, help educate you, bring the tools to bear, and then pivot over into the mobilize phase, start down the path of say, doing a proof of concept. One of the successful patterns that I've seen in these migrations is to really start with something that is not too hard. I know as technologists, we often like to start with the hardest case, thinking that it makes all the other ones easy. But the one way that's definitely one way to slice it. But when I'm doing large estate migrations, I'm always a big advocate of starting with something simple, building some of that muscle, and also as we start to handle the easy ones, we build some confidence, and that virtuous cycle kind of builds on one another. So, our goal there is to kind of help you during those earlier phases. But then when we actually get into the past the proof of concept and we're starting to see success, the question immediately becomes, okay, how fast can we get there? Because you're realizing the value, you're not managing databases anymore. The business case that we did during the assess phase looks pretty compelling. So it's really boils down to how do we come up with a detailed migration plan and a detailed business case. So again, that's something that AWS and our incredible partner ecosystem can help you out with. And then lastly, it's about migrating, right? How do we get over to AWS at scale? And we really have sort of 3 different outlets that we can explore. I have some customers that are saying, hey, Phil, let's just do DIY. That's perfect. We can support you through those proof of concepts. We can give you the tooling. And oftentimes customers that have some experience on AWS take that approach. Other times we have customers that say, hey, Phil, we need a partner, or we really want AWS in here to be able to help us. And we can support you on that as well. So those are really the kind of 3 major scenarios that you'll likely move into, either DIY, partner-led, or AWS. But at the core here is just know that we've got the support to be able to help facilitate those migrations. On the topic of partners, I would be remiss not to call out an incredible partner ecosystem that we have that supports these migrations to AWS. We have our break-free partners like Navisite. I'm just going to call out a few here, Virtusa, that really work with customers to be able to help sort of on the technical migration side. So really going through, leveraging a lot of times the same tool sets that we have, coming up with that detailed migration plan, and then helping you execute it. The other set of partners we have is really licensed advisory partners. So House of Brick, Palisade, great partners. What I love about what they bring to the table is oftentimes technology is only one thing that needs to be considered, and that alone is challenging enough. But we would also, we're not blind that many of you on the call still have license agreements in place with commercial vendors. So what is the most efficient way and effective way based on your specific licensing construct that say you have with either Oracle or Microsoft or whatever it may be, to unwind that? And these folks have years of experience, can look at your specific contract and construct of contract to be able to say, yep, based on what we see here and based on what AWS is offering, we see this as the most efficient way for you to start to dial down your reliance on those commercial databases. So they provide sort of a great dynamic duo between the 2 of those sides, the licensing side as well as the technical and migration side. And then lastly, we should mention the Database Migration Accelerator from AWS. So this is new. We actually launched it in 2020. And DMA is a solution that brings together the AWS Database Migration Service that we talked about, the AWS Schema Conversion tool we talked about, and really the experts to help customers like you migrate away from traditional commercial databases at a fixed price. Something that we heard loud and clear was that customers wanted a reliable factory for refactoring not only the database, but the applications as well. So DMA supports today migrations from Oracle and SQL Server to Amazon Aurora, and then Amazon RDS engines such as Postgres and MySQL. But really the benefit here is it allows you kind of a predictable way to model out for some of your workloads, the refactoring of your databases, as well as the application side as well. So pretty compelling offering. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and pull up a couple of resources to draw you to. Sort of the home base is this kind of database freedom link right here. If you just type in AWS database freedom or within your search engine, or go to this URL here, it's really a good landing zone for all of these assets and the content that you see on this page. And we'll be able to help direct you towards all of the things that we talked about and actually much, much more. So with that, we actually arrived at the end. I appreciate all of the kind of the questions along the way, but certainly we've got a bit of extra time now to spend a bit of time answering any remaining questions that you might have.